Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Gus O'Donnell, the chairman of Pro Bono Economics, and I used to be a civil servant. I ended up being cabinet secretary and head of the civil service for a number of prime ministers. Delighted to be with you on this subject, which brings together three of my passions: football, well-being, and measuring the impact of charities. So this for me is perfect. Great way to be spending the day. Looking forward to the interaction and receiving your questions. So let me start off by talking about what we're going to do today. We're going to look at new ways of measuring impact based on the difference that charities, for example, and the one we have today, Football Beyond Borders, can have on the well-being of children. And this work builds on three key foundations. First of all, it uses the guidance that the Treasury has developed on supplementary guidance on measuring well-being. This is really important because actually, if you use this guidance and you're trying to get money out of government, the fact that you've used Treasury methodology will be really important. The fact that if you're trying with foundations to think about how do we impress the foundations that this is actually serious, sensible work, again, using Treasury methodology will work very, very well. Secondly, we're building on the fantastic work of the Be Well program. Another PBE trustee, David Gregson, fundamental in that work. It started in Manchester, aiming to comprehensively measure the well-being of young people and co-create solutions once we've identified what the issues are. So it provides vital data. And finally, we've got some generous support from a number of people. Porticus, Integrate ED partnership that have allowed for this collaboration between PBE, Football Beyond Borders, and Be Well. And also I'd like to thank the University of Manchester. We'll come to that later. So the report is a culmination of about 15 months of work, and you can get the report by looking at the PBE website. There'll be a link to the report coming up on the chat. There's a great lineup of speakers we've got today. First of all, just a few words about housekeeping. We'll get a short presentation, then have a short discussion with our speakers. Then we have some time at the end for audience questions. So if you want to submit questions, please do so via the live chat, and then we will look at the ones that have come up most often and we'll answer them. Hopefully, we'll have time at the end. Just to let you know, the event is being recorded and will be available on the Bono Economics website and the YouTube channel after the session. And please feel free to post on social media. If you do so, please use the hashtag PBE events. So enough housekeeping. We are very lucky to have a great line of speakers. So let me tell you a bit about them. First of all, we have John Franklin, who is the Chief Economist at Pro Bono Economics. Also the wonderful Nancy Hay, Executive Director for the What Works Centre for Wellbeing. And Jack Reynolds, who is Chief Executive at Football Beyond Borders. What a great job to have. Eh? And as well, we have Darcy and Noor, who will be telling us about their experiences actually live of working with Football Beyond Borders. We'll also have a short contribution from Neil Humphrey, who is the Professor of Psychology of Education at the University of Manchester, who is sadly unable to join us live. So, ready to get started. Let's get on with it so that we can leave enough time to get to your questions. So I'm going to hand over now to John Franklin from PBE to talk us through how the program operated and how it was evaluated by PBE. John, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gus. So for those of you who don't know us, Pro Bono Economics is a charity, and we use data, evidence, and skills of economists and other analysts to support organisations trying to tackle the causes and consequences of low well-being in the UK. Now, we've been very deliberate about sort of tying our strategy and our vision to low well-being and addressing that for a couple of key reasons. The first one is we think that well-being captures what matters. It's what's important in people's lives. It's a good way of understanding how somebody's doing and what their overall quality of life is. So When we talk to lots of social sector organisations, lots of charities that we work with, traditionally, yes, we may have been able to value the impact that they have on productivity or the impact that they're having in terms of saving the NHS money, but actually what they care about is the quality of the lives of the people they're working with. So we think it's really important to tie into actually what matters for people. The second reason that it's really important to us, and that we've specifically tied our strategy around this, is that the science around measuring well-being and understanding well-being, understand what influences people's well-being, has evolved really rapidly over the last couple of decades in the UK. And we've got lots of kind of really pragmatic and insightful evidence that has developed off the back of that, that really poses interesting challenges for the world of policy, but also potentially interesting and useful solutions to tackling that. Now, one of the themes that has come up in terms of that evidence is the broad trend in terms of children's well-being in the UK, and it's quite a worrying trend that has emerged. So, if we look at the level of well-being as measured by mean life satisfaction score, so this is a score of overall life satisfaction for children in the UK measured on a scale of 0 to 10. And that has declined over the last 10 years quite substantially, from an average of around 8.2 down to around 7.6. Now, that may not sound like huge changes in numbers. Sometimes it's very difficult to understand what the scale of that is. But to put it into context, that's about twice the drop in well-being as we saw for adults during the pandemic, during the middle of the lockdown. So you think about all that stress, all that strain that we had, and the impact that had on people's quality of life during the pandemic, the fears about finances, the fears about health, the impact of doing homeschooling, which from my perspective was incredibly stressful. If you imagine that, it's twice as big in terms of the impact on the quality of life, this downward trend that we're seeing in children's well-being. So it's a huge impact, it's a big shift, and we should be worried about it. Now, it's easy to dismiss this. Is this just the impact of social media, of mobile phones, of fears about climate change, as big global things that I think, it's very difficult for us as a society to uniquely address. But I think the international evidence asks some interesting questions of the UK around this, because when we look at evidence from the OECD that was gathered in 2022, they looked at the well-being of 15-year-olds across a whole host of countries across the world. And the UK was firmly in the relegation zone in that kind of table of children's well-being. The average level of well-being for children in the UK came 71st out of 74 countries, so right near the bottom. And what's worse is the scale of that is getting worse over time. So the children's well-being, based on those OECD studies, has got worse in the UK more quickly than in lots of other countries. So we're doing badly by international standards. It seems to be getting worse over time, and it's getting worse at a faster rate than many other countries. And I think this all points, particularly when we combine it with levels of poor mental health amongst our children, and the huge waiting list we have for children and adolescent mental health services. We're facing a bit of a crisis here in terms of children's well-being and young people's mental health within the UK. Now, this feels like something that we need to address. We need to address this as a country, as a society. We need to do something about it. And I don't imagine for a single second that there is some magic silver bullet solution that is going to solve this all at once. There is not going to be a single simple answer to addressing this. It's going to be a whole host of different types of intervention, of different types of systems change, which are going to make the difference and try and reverse this trend over time. And that's going to take a really long-term approach to doing that. But part of that will be having the evidence so that we can understand what sorts of interventions, what sorts of changes would make the difference in order to drive up those levels of well-being over time and address the challenges that we've got as a country. And now the work that we're publishing today with Football Beyond Borders, I think provides a really great example of the sorts of interventions that might make a difference. And we're going to hear a lot more about Football Beyond Borders a bit later on. But in a nutshell, they work in secondary schools with children primarily who are at risk of being excluded from school. And they work to provide a trusted adult mentor within the program. And these trusted adult mentors, they use sport as a way of building that relationship, establishing that trust, because you can't just tell children to go ahead and trust this person and confide in them. It needs to be a relationship that's built, that's authentic, that's organic, that develops over time. So they use sport to do that, to build that relationship. And then they use that relationship to help work with those people either on a one-to-one basis or as part of a wider group to try and address some of the difficulties, some of the challenges that those young people might be facing, and think about how they can manage those challenges, manage those issues over time. Now, the use of trusted adults is well established in terms of the links between having a trusted adult and the help that can provide for young people. There's studies that have shown that having a trusted adult can make the difference in terms of protecting young people that have faced difficulties in their life from a whole host of negative outcomes, from health outcomes to mental well-being and mental health as well. So it feels like this should be something that would help to address the kind of well-being challenges that we're facing in the UK today. But how can we prove that? How can we get the evidence to really demonstrate that? And that's been the kind of focus of this project. Now, one of the great things about Football Beyond Borders is that they have been really investing in the data and evidence they captured over time. So they know, for the young people they're working with, how their level of mental well-being has changed. They used a measure called the Short Warwick Edinburgh Mental Well-being Scale, which is a measure of mental well-being for young people, and they've used that over time to kind of track changes. And that's great. It's really important, and it's really essential that they've invested in that evidence. But on its own, it doesn't necessarily tell us the impact they're having, because it's really hard to know, well, what would have happened for these young people over time without Football Beyond Borders? And typically, from an evaluation perspective, if we want to be able to put numbers around that, be able to quantify the scale of that impact, we need some kind of comparison group, some kind of control group to compare against and look at, well, what happened to those people that didn't receive the same treatment. And this has been why this collaboration between Football Beyond Borders, Be Well, University of Manchester has been absolutely critical, because Be Well is a program that has gone out and gathered lots and lots of really high quality longitudinal data on children's well-being up in Manchester. And they were able to use that to act as a bit of a comparison group, a control group. We can look at similar young people facing similar challenges with similar starting levels of well-being and look at, well, what happened to them over time compared to those involved in Football Beyond Borders program. And that's kind of first phase of this work, is looking at what impact can we pick up in terms of differences in well-being outcomes between those young people that have received the support of Football Beyond Borders and similar young people in that wider Be Well data set. And that gives us a pretty good standard of evaluation to understand the impact of the program. And then what we've done as Pro Bono Economics is bring together the guidance from the Treasury that Gus mentioned earlier on, which is guidance on how to put a kind of a monetary value, an economic value against those well-being outcomes. And we've applied it to the findings from the study that's been completed by University of Manchester using the Be Well and Football Beyond Borders data. So hopefully you can pick up, like, this is a collaboration between lots and lots of different organisations that's relied both on those foundations that Football Beyond Borders have put in place in terms of being really rigorous about the data they've captured, the foundations that put in place by the Be Well programme in terms of that rigorous approach to measuring well-being for young people across the Manchester area, and now expanding into Hampshire and Isle of Wight and Southampton and Portsmouth. As well as bringing together the monetary value of that using that Treasury value that we mentioned earlier on. And it's that combination of bringing all those things together that has been absolutely critical to getting this report done. Now, unfortunately, as Gus mentioned, Professor Neil Humphrey wasn't available to join the webinar at this moment, but he has helpfully recorded a short video for us that describes a bit more detail about what Be Well's all about and the work that they've done in terms of comparing the wellbeing outcomes. So we're just going to share that now, because that gives you the feel for that first phase of the work and how that went and what some of the findings were from that.
Beyond Borders. I'll start by acknowledging my colleague Chi-Chi Cheng, who ran our analyses and without whom this research wouldn't have been possible. A little bit about Be Well to begin with. It's a wellbeing programme. It's been running in Greater Manchester since 2021, and we've recently extended it to a second location in the south of England that spans Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton. The aim of Be Well is to make young people's wellbeing everybody's business. The backbone of the programme is an annual survey of the wellbeing and drivers of wellbeing of young people, which we use to generate an evidence base that can inform action on the ground to improve young people's lives. So far in Be Well, we've surveyed over 85,000 young people aged 12 to 15 across nearly 300 schools and 14 local authorities. We also benefit in Be Well from background socio-demographic information provided by local authorities and schools. And we survey young people about a whole range of different aspects of their lives, different elements of their well-being, including mental well-being and life satisfaction, which we used in this evaluation, and a whole range of different drives of well-being, young people's health and routines, their relationships, how they feel about school, the amount of support that they receive from different sources, and so on. And we've started to use and apply the Be Well data set to evaluate interventions like Football Beyond Borders. So Football Beyond Borders use the same mental well-being scale that we do in Be Well, and that gives us an opportunity to try and find a natural comparison group from within the Be Well data set against which to compare the mental well-being outcomes of young people who've taken part in Football Beyond Borders. So we use something called the Difference in Differences framework. This is just a way of thinking about outcomes for young people who've taken part in the intervention and comparing them to outcomes for young people who haven't taken part in the intervention. And what we need here in order to make really robust inferences about the effects of Football Beyond Borders is a really well matched comparison group. So we search from within the Be Well dataset, which is massive, to find an appropriately matched comparison group. So a group of young people who look very similar to the young people, the at-risk young people who've taken part in Football Beyond Borders. And what you can see in that illustration there is prior to and following the matching process. So prior to the matching process, when we've got thousands and thousands of young people in the Be Well data set, the data sets are not very well matched. But after the matching process, we find that they're very well matched indeed. So we've extracted from the Be Well data set a comparison group of young people who share very similar characteristics to the 46 at-risk young people for whom we had data from Football Beyond Borders. And what we find when we compare their outcomes is that Football Beyond Borders significantly improves the mental well-being of at-risk young people. To give you a little bit more detail, the effect that we see is just under 2.5 points improvement on our mental well-being scale. When we standardise that, it's an effect of 0.44. This equates to about a 17 percentile point increase in mental well-being. And that size of effect compares really favourably to effects observed for other school-based targeted mental health interventions. And when we've converted it to changes in life satisfaction, we find that it equates to somewhere between 0.58 and 0.64 point improvement on our 10-point life satisfaction scale, which is subsequently used by John and colleagues at Bono Economics for economic evaluation, which I'm sure he's going to talk to you about. The intervention effect that we see is stable when we perform a range of robustness and sensitivity checks. And what that means is that basically when we analyse the data in different ways, we see very similar results. And that gives us confidence in the effect that we're observing, that we think that Football Beyond Borders genuinely does improve the mental well-being of at-risk young people.
Brilliant. So thank you for Neil for pre-recording that for us. So at the end of that analysis that the University of Manchester were able to do using the Be Well data, we can be pretty certain that Football Beyond Borders is having a positive impact on the well-being of young people. And specifically, it's having a protective impact. Because if we look at the kind of average starting score for Football Beyond Borders participants, and particularly the young people at risk of exclusion within that group, compared to the comparison group that's matched on from the Football Beyond from the Be Well data, you can see that the Football Beyond Borders young people, as shown using the dark blue bars in this chart, their well-being stays broadly stable between the before and after. But the comparison group that we're using tend to see a decline in well-being. So is this Football Beyond Borders offering a kind of protective role in terms of helping to maintain higher levels of well-being for those people they're working with compared to other people that don't receive that kind of support. And to put this, give this kind of sense of scale, as Neil said, we converted this into an ONS life satisfaction measure, which is the measure used in the Treasury guidance. And that suggests an impact around 0.6 points on that 0 to 10 scale for life satisfaction. And that is pretty similar to the kind of impact we see for an adult in the UK when they go from being unemployed to entering employment. And that is a kind of really well-researched, well-understood, and quite big impact on life satisfaction, on well-being. So it gives you that kind of sense of scale. This is quite substantial when you compare it to the kind of life events an adult would have to experience in order to see the same sort of impact on their well-being. So our job, after having this impact on well-being, was to put this into economic terms, so put it into a pounds and pence value, just to help us understand the value for money that this offers. We have taken the impact for those children at risk of exclusion. Now, that's not everyone that Football Beyond Borders works, so we've kind of averaged that across all of the young people that Football Beyond Borders works with, and that works out at around a quarter of a point increase on average across all of those young people for the impact of the Football Beyond Borders program using that ONS life satisfaction measure. And when we multiply that through by the monetary values that the Treasury places on improvements in well-being, that equates to around £2,300 worth of well-being improvements per child, which for some reason has come out slightly odd on this version of the slides. And in 2022-2023, Football Beyond Borders worked with around 2,401 students that year, which means we're talking about an impact of the total Football Beyond Borders program around 5.5 million in terms of well-being benefits to the UK delivered through that program in 2022-2023 alone. Now, it's worth emphasizing that we are talking about just purely about those impacts from the improvement in quality of life of well-being based on the Treasury value. There are other benefits that aren't included here at the moment. So, for instance, it's likely that Football Beyond Borders is supporting those young people to get better academic outcomes, and we know that that is linked through to increased productivity and better wages at a later date. So it's likely there are bigger impacts there. We also haven't included anything for the likely impacts in terms of reducing the number of exclusions, permanent exclusions for the young people they're working with. Given that is a particular focus of this program, that could be really substantial as well. So I think it's worth thinking about this is a kind of low-end estimate that's just purely based on those well-being improvements, and already it looks like Football Beyond Borders are adding huge amounts of value. And we can look at that 5.5 million in different ways as well. So when we think about it in terms of per trusted adult, that works out at around 150,000 additional benefits per trusted adult professional, or around £109,000 per school that they're working in. And if we compare that to a cost of the program that works out at about just over £1,000 per young person, that's the equivalent of £2.20 of wellbeing benefits for every £1 spent on the program. And just to emphasize, those are wellbeing benefits alone. Now, we didn't have good enough evidence. We didn't have the same quality of evidence to be able to talk about the economic value of those impacts on academic outcomes or exclusion outcomes as well. But we did look at some scenarios around it. So using some plausible scenarios for the potential impact that Football Beyond Borders is having on academic outcomes, it could easily be that £2.20 of benefits per pound spent is close to £4 of benefit per pound spent. And if we added in the impacts from reduction of exclusions, it could be significantly higher than that as well. So we have looked at some scenarios around this, and I think that £2.20 of benefits for every pound spent is very much a low-end estimate at the moment, a kind of conservative, cautious estimate. But it already highlights the value that Football Beyond Borders is bringing and the value for money that program is likely to be having. So that's everything that I was going to cover today. I think there's kind of three main takeaways that I just want to emphasize at the end here. The first one obviously has to be that the Football Beyond Borders program, we can look at all the qualitative evidence. It already feels like it's making a difference, and we'll hear more about that in a moment from some of our panel members. But even if we look at it from a kind of really narrow value for money perspective of what does this bring in terms of the improvements of well-being, it looks like a great program, and it's delivering lots of benefits for the cost of the program. I think the second takeaway that we've got from this is just demonstrating, look, it's actually feasible to look at the well-being impacts of programs like this. It does require us to have good data from the charity. It requires us to have that background data from the Be Well program in order to compare against. But it is possible to do this, and it's possible to apply that Treasury guidance, which has more typically been used for looking at wellbeing impacts for adults than it has done for children. But it is possible to apply that to children's interventions as well and look at the value for money. And I think the final thing that we would emphasize as part of this is we really need to get the foundations right if we want to be able to tackle the crisis that we've got in children's wellbeing and children's mental health in the UK today. And I think part of that, a really important part of that, is getting those foundations right in terms of gathering the right kinds of data around children's wellbeing. And I think the fact that this project was entirely enabled by having both the data from Football Beyond Borders, but also that really high quality data, longitudinal data about children's wellbeing from the Be Well programme is absolutely critical. So if we want more of this, if we want more evidence to demonstrate what we can do to address the lower levels of well-being that we have for our children in the UK compared to other countries, if we want more evidence in terms of what works, what are the most effective interventions for doing that, then we need to continue to invest in those foundations, in that background evidence, in that background data to enable us to do that.
Analysis of the stats and the data, and I think we've come away from that realizing, first of all, that the overall position is really worrying. I mean, very depressing about the trends that we've seen from those OECD data overall. But the ability of this program, as it were, protect from that decline is amazing. But stats experience of actually being in the experience of working with Football Beyond Borders, and what difference do you think it's made to you?
I'm sorry, I can't really hear anything. It's lagging.
Gus,
over to you.
Would you mind repeating the question? Because I think you're breaking up a little bit.
I know, I can't hear anything.
Darcy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. In which case, I think we were going to bring you in at this point, just kind of emphasising that so far we've looked at the stats, we looked at the data, and that tells one story. But it'd be great to get your perspective as somebody that was involved in Football Beyond Borders programme on what difference it made to you.
So FEB actually really benefited me in school because like I had so much going on that I never really had a focus in school, and I never really had anything to look forward to. It was just like, so with FEB, I had something to focus on in order for me to actually get to school, and having the relationship with like Noah, Michael, Sam, having a relationship with all the, it was like, because I never really got to, I didn't really know how to like, express my emotions, and obviously becoming so close with Noah, it really helped me in order to sit and actually speak to him, because he knew like my mum and my brother, because my brother did it before me. It was like I felt closer to him because he knew more about the situation and everything else. So I feel like that brought me closer to, in order for me to do it. And obviously me being the only girl in my FEB thing, I never felt like, because I was so close, like I was close with everybody. Everyone was just so welcoming in the FEB group thing. So yeah, that was like my main impact on FEB. And obviously with like the wellbeing side, it really helped me just to be who I am and like help my family, and then it just made me be more confident in myself and in school and give me a focus.
Darcy, thank you very much. That's really invaluable, and that's great to hear. And Noah, you're clearly a key part of delivering that. Tell us what you see as the key pressures on young people now and their well-being, and what do you think how do you think the program helps on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is quick to say, which is natural. You know, there's academic and social pressures for young people in schools. You know, the pressures from home, definitely, which we can all relate to. Pressures from schools, but then also the one which is probably can impact us the most is the pressures from friends as well. And to tackle that, I think the thing that brings the pressure and affects the well-being even more so is the inconsistency that is the young people are exposed to and experiencing at school. And yeah, I think, you know, even if we talk about additional stuff that they're doing around school, such as like their hobbies like football or gymnastics or whatever, a lot of that is either being cancelled due to the weather, or it's just not fully funded, and staff can't put on these activities for the young people. And then even within the school, I think, you know, staff turnover, inconsistent treatment with the young people as well. You know, just from the stresses from the teachers' side, you know, they're getting the stress and the pressure from the school. So that behavior and relationship between the students and the teacher can also be very inconsistent. And if you you go into the schools, you meet a lot of the young people, and you just ask them, something that me and Darcy done quite a lot was, we just talk about our week, like what was the weekend like, what was going on. And I think if you go into schools and you speak to young people, a lot of stuff that they had planned or they wanted to do doesn't actually come out. They end up being let down by somebody, or something just doesn't happen, and all that it's a build up, and over time that's only going to impact and affect the young person overall. And I think that's why what we do at FBB and how we do it, being consistent over the 2+ year period on a weekly basis, it only provides a safe and comfortable environment for the young people to, as Darcy said, find themselves, be themselves, and become more and be more stable in the school environment.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to you and Darcy. Congratulations on what you've done. It's amazing. Jack, as the chief exec of Football Beyond Borders, to what extent do you think you're standing in for being a teacher, or is it different when you come in as a charity?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So definitely we have some advantages as a charity. The kind of young people we work with often have had difficult experiences at school, maybe confrontational relationships with teachers, and having the tracksuits, the link with football is an initial way to begin that relationship, right? I think a lot of teenagers have, through their own experiences, quite rightly, a bit of suspicion they're holding about new adults coming into their life, right? Without going into much more detail on that. Football is often a great way in, even you and I go talking about Man United, right? There's an initial way in. However, what we are saying is we think the biggest change within the school system would be if school leaders, teacher training, pastoral staff training had more of a relational focus. We know how robust the evidence base is in terms of how important a trust that relationship is. And we also know, based on what the evidence is, but also even what Noah's saying, it isn't always that hard. And we also think a lot of teachers would probably enjoy being given more time, more freedom to try and build genuine trusting relationships with vulnerable young people. So yes, it helps FBB, the brand, the tracksuit, but we also think there's far more the education system can do to support the adults already in the system to be a trusted adult to a vulnerable young person.
Thank you, Jack. And I think there is some work behind the scenes to try and think about how we get teachers' views on the importance of wellbeing for kids, because we think they're quite supportive, but we need to measure it better. Nancy, tell us about the importance of gathering wellbeing data for children, and that you make sure you got the right data, and then you've got something that you can compare it with.
Look, this is really fantastic. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, would we be able to do what we're doing today? I would have been absolutely blown away. This is exactly what we hoped would happen as a result of this. There are many, many people and organisations that care about our young people, and they're doing it in lots and lots of different sectors. And we have some data. We had some data about how children and young people's well-being was going, but it was a relatively small sample. But what this meant was that we can understand how we can get big enough data that lots of different groups can be compared to. We can get those control groups. But what we can also see is that psychosocial impacts are really big. They can be valued and they can be used robustly and well. And this is important because resources are scarce always. And actually, more importantly, the people's lives really, really matter. So it matters to the individuals particularly. Are they living happy and fulfilling lives now and in the future? And actually, it's our future well-being as a nation. So understanding whether something is safe, is it effective, is it cost effective, is it worth the money and the effort really, really matters. What we did in this process is we understood the concepts and measures behind children's well-being. We picked out ones that were robust, that were consistent, of both the drivers of well-being and the domains of it, and the methodology to use to evaluate it. And then what we can then do, if we've got robust, consistent measurement that we can use with confidence, making that as accessible and easy to use as possible, like the Be Well data has done, makes it much cheaper and quicker for each charity, each organization to use that to create an understanding of the value and really improve what they're doing. So one of the things I loved about this program is it also was about learning. So it applied learning that we already know, and then it kept on learning to work out how it could have the biggest impact possible. So this means that when you're on the receiving end of a report like this, how confident can you be in those various claims? Well, actually, you can be really confident. And WenWeb's the one that they've used here is a super measure because it's robust and the academics like it, but it's also really practical and very widely used. It is deliberately designed to be the opposite of mental illness. So we're creating the things that we actually want to see in people's lives as well. So this also has shown us how that investment in the data in the school system can be used much more widely to create a much greater impact by as many people as possible who care about children and improve people's lives in the process.
Thank you, Nancy. Very powerful. And I don't know if anyone's got the same picture as me, but you managed to do that without moving your lips, which is brilliant.
It's magic. I can't fix it.
Don't worry. John, back to you. What makes Football Beyond Borders the right kind of fit for this analysis? And is this a sort of template for how other people should be looking at measuring impact?
I'm going to answer your second question first, if that's okay, which is yes, I hope this is a template for other organizations to use. And we'd love to work with more organizations over the next couple of years to produce more of these evaluations and build that evidence base around what works for tackling well-being, what sorts of interventions can have a positive impact on children's well-being. In terms of what made Football Beyond Borders perfect for this, I think there's kind of three key things. First of all, the data that they were gathering. They had been really good, really rigorous, really consistent about capturing data for the young people they were working with using a standardized, validated measure, such as the Short Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. So that was the first thing, is their data. I think the second thing is the alignment with the data that was available from BeWell. So BeWell is a fantastic program. At the time when we started looking at this, they were only gathering data in Manchester. They gather it for certain age groups, so children aged 14, 15, that sort of age group. The fact that that aligned neatly with Football Beyond Borders, they were operating in Manchester in some of the BeWell schools and also some other schools that weren't involved in the BeWell program, and they were using the same measures. It all kind of neatly aligned with that basic data infrastructure that we could get from the BeWell program. But the final thing on sort of, I guess, more of a moral level, a philosophical level, is I think it provides a great example of what the social sector is uniquely positioned to do. And I think whilst there is absolutely, I'm sure, more that adults, professionals within the existing statutory school system could do to act as trusted adults, I think even if you were going to design a perfectly, beautifully well-funded system, there would be a space for social sector organisations doing the kinds of things that Football Beyond Borders are doing, to sit alongside those professionals that are working within the system. I think there's something special, something unique about that slight distance, I guess, from statutory services, which may be viewed with some scepticism or some suspicion, and that's what the social sector does brilliantly. So I think it's that combination of data from the charity, alignment with that data infrastructure that was available from BeWell, and just this kind of really special, unique role that the social sector can provide in helping to tackle some of these challenges. And I think bring those things together is what really made this project work.
Thank you, John. I can't resist there adding in that the work we did with Pro Bono Economics on the law, and lots of others on the Law Family Commission on civil society, did emphasize this fact that, you know, too often we think about the public sector and the private sector and we leave out the social sector completely, and they have a really important role and can do things that the others can't. Now, in what you were talking about and what everyone has been talking about all that time, the phrase trusted adult comes back a lot. And Nancy, I know that the What Works Centre does lots of work about, you know, things that matter for well-being. Can you explain, you know, why are trusted adults important? What's behind that?
So this is really clever what Football Beyond Borders have been doing. So they've taken stuff that we know works from the evidence. So we know, for example, from Public Health Wales research on resilience, that three things that really matter for long-term resilience for young people, even if life events don't work out how you would hope, are a trusted adult, peer support, and weekly sport. Those things are the things that make a biggest difference. And what they've done is take that learning and understand how they're working, how to make the biggest impact of those, what I would call like social things that actually really make the difference between whether an intervention works or not, and how to be most effective in that. And we can also see in the loneliness evidence that that adult at school can make the experience of loneliness. You can still feel lonely and like slightly different from the people in your area, but actually the impact on well-being is less if you have a trusted adult in school. So what it's doing is taking all of that and applying it in the context and keeping learning about how we get that trusted adult bit as good as we can get it. And that means that others can use this learning as well. So that's the other exciting bit about this partnership and sharing that learning, is it's not just those people who are in Football Beyond Borders and those that learn from it. All of us can add to that collective learning about what really makes a difference, whether that's in reducing violence, reducing a whole range of different contexts as well. So trusted adults, key thing to be looking at from the evidence and furthering that learning through this project.
Great, and let's hope that lots of policy people are coming up as we approach an election and new administration, whatever it is that they learn from all of this work. Jack, speaking of learning, what do you think Football Beyond Borders has learned from all of this, and will it make any difference to what you do?
Yeah, we're always learning is the first thing I would say. We're based, maybe unusually in this space, we've kind of put a founding question at the heart of our work, which is, what does it take for our most vulnerable young people to thrive in mainstream schools? So part of the reason maybe we've come up with some of these things, our program seems so well designed, is we spent the last 10 years rigorously working out what it is that does genuinely make a difference in young people's lives. And so it's always so helpful and so exciting for me as the co-founder and chief executive to be able to work with real experts who can help us further on that journey. So that is definitely the case. I think this is also then important for us, an organization, because impact is ultimately about making decisions, and the hardest decisions you're ever going to make as a leader is about where to allocate resource. So this is suggesting to us that trusted adult relationships are a key mechanism of change on our program, right? That then leads to a whole set of decisions about where we should be placing limited resource. So for example, should we be spending our impact budget on program design? Should we be spending our time on creating really good social and emotional learning resources for our curriculum? Or should we be saying, actually, the point of us as a business is the who does the work, not the what? So should our focus be very much on recruitment of staff, on the retention of staff, on the training of staff? And really across the last 2 years, that's been the shift already. And this report really confirms that our hunch that it's the trust adult relationship, which is probably the mechanism of change, is the right one at this level. And so therefore, it continues to make sense that we see our business as one which is about the people who work for us and the training they get, more so necessarily than the content of what we deliver.
Thank you, Jack. And final question for the panel. I'm going to open it up, and then we'll go to the audience questions. I mean, we've seen right at the beginning that problem about the declining well-being of young people, and international evidence very strongly showing that we're really not doing very well on this. And we read reports in the papers, this is all due to iPhones and social media and all the rest of it. What do you think are the key issues, the things we should be trying to change to improve the well-being of young people? Who would like to come in on that first? If not, go on, Nancy.
So we know some things that really do work, and psychosocial skills really work. We know that physical health interventions work, so fruit and vegetables, exercise, sleep, all of that works. And actually, sometimes in the focus on mental health, we often forget the physical health, and actually their two are really interrelated. And for young women particularly, I was concerned from the Be Well data about the physical activity of teenage girls, for example, but also things like employment and education and those skills for life. So and they interact, of course, but like when you're younger, that transition from education to employment really, really matters because the effects are lifelong as well. So thinking about how we make sure we avoid the very worst wellbeing outcomes of unemployment, precarity and very low incomes as well for the future really matters. So it's a yes and approach for the psychological, the social, the economic and the physical health as well. But the thing is actually we often have in the best interest of the child in legislation, the lack of information about what that actually is in evidence and data really, really matters. And the way we can do that quickly at scale is by this type of measurement in schools and linking it to the efforts that people are doing with a huge effort that people are taking to improve the lives of young people. And it's one of the things that you can do that would probably most efficiently speed that up.
Great. Okay. And I think, yeah, can't reinforce that. If you know you've got a problem, let's look at the data and try and work out by decent, proper analysis, what are the things that we should really focus on, and then think about different programs. We've seen recent analysis of, good analysis of programs that have worked in the past. I mean, most recently we've seen the work on Sure Start, and that we need to kind of learn the lessons of. There are some things that really work. Too often people emphasize all of those government programs that don't work. We should think about all the ones that are success and how can we replicate them and scale them up. Right. Okay. So now we're moving to the audience. It's your turn, all of you who are registered online. My private chat has at the moment come up with a question is, have you done an assessment on the correlation between decline of wellbeing on youth programs and the disinvestment on youth work, youth clubs, sports infrastructure and education at all? So
I'll have to come into say I would love to have done that, but I think this is one of those things that has been limited by the where data has been collected and how data has been collected over time. So if you think about the kinds of administrative data that gets gathered about children, it's typically putting academic progress to one side, which is one area where I guess there is a slightly positive measure. It's typically everything that's gone wrong ever. So it's, where they've got into trouble, where they haven't attended school, where they need support of kind of social care services, where they've been involved in the criminal justice system. It's nearly always with a negative lens that we capture the information about children. And I think this is such a problem with the system because it makes looking at some of these kinds of questions really, really difficult. Nowhere do we capture it. If we all sat around and thought about what are the outcomes that we want from for our children as a country, it would be something about helping children to thrive now and thrive as adults. And we're not capturing that anywhere on a kind of rigorous, consistent basis. There are examples, really great practice examples like Be Well, which are starting to come through. But if we were capturing that on a more rigorous basis, then we would be absolutely in a position to look at how the different types of intervention and as funding waxes and wanes for things like youth programs and youth work, the kind of impact that's having. But that's really, really difficult to do given the constraints that we've got at the moment in terms of what data we actually capture about our children.
Okay, another really good question coming up, which I'm going to start to answer as well. But it says, how do we help children that do not like sports? And I remember going to a school in Liverpool that was a sports academy, and they did have an issue with a group of people who just weren't interested in sport, and they actually had dance lessons in the morning, and the dance lessons were incredibly popular, particularly with the girls, and they were having pretty much the same effect as you would get from a sports program. But in general, how do we help when they basically say, well, I don't want to do any of this sporting stuff. My thing is chess, to give an example of Rachel Reeves' main sport. What do you think?
Pastime that. I mean, for me, it's quite hard to understand how someone doesn't like football, but that's partly my own experience. But there's a couple of things here. So Spirit of 2012 Trust, another third sector organisation, have been looking at how you reach young women, particularly, who wouldn't necessarily do sport. And you've mentioned dance as an example, but actually that's a physical activity with music and stuff like that. We can see this in social prescribing, where there's lots of different types of activities that people do that can improve well-being. So there are other potential ones. So following interest is particularly good, but the classic is music, and where actually the evidence base is even stronger than it is for sport and football. But I guess Jack may also have some thoughts about what they do with people who turn up and go, well, no, actually, that's not my thing.
It's quite a lot, right? I mean, I think there's maybe a distinction. We know that moving our bodies is really, really important to our well-being. So I would say if someone doesn't like physical activity, I'd be wanting to understand how that has happened, what impressions they may have got that they are someone who shouldn't move. I think, broadly speaking, for everyone, it's helpful to move our bodies. And the second one for us, it goes back to the peers influence in the relationships. One of our foundational theories is adolescent neuroscience. We know that teenagers are particularly attuned to peer acceptance. And so really what FPB's model is about in many ways is about creating social acceptance around things which adolescents often aren't interested in doing. I think I can speak with a bit of authority on this because we initially only used to work with boys, and for years head teachers said to us, don't work with girls because they're not often the ones who are going to be at risk of exclusion, and they don't like football. Today, working with 3,000 young people, 40% of our participants are girls. A lot of them are inactive at the age we begin to work with them and don't particularly have an interest in football. The way we work with young people is the relationship first, the passion second. And so it's very possible. And we are completely agnostic about whether everyone should be doing football or not. I want young people to have trusted adult relationships. I want them to move, and I want them to have strong peer relationships. Football is probably the best tool for that currently at a kind of broad level, but please take our methodology and use it for chess or dance or running up hills or whatever the hell you do to get your kicks and move your body.
That's a very good answer. I agree with that. Yeah. So the next question we got coming in, really quite technical. The question is, with more evidence coming up on the predictive power of childhood well-being on adult well-being, what's the view on potentially including those lifetime benefits? So should we be saying, okay, you've improved their well-being now, but actually there is some evidence, I think, in a lot of the work that Richard Layard has done using cohort studies on the impact on future well-being of the individual. John, do you want to kick off with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would love to be in a position where we could do that. I think it's very likely that there is a longer term impact from improving socio-emotional outcomes for young people. We haven't included it in this, so we've been quite tight in our definition here and just used the well-being improvements for the year that the program was provided, in which we were kind of assessing it. So we haven't included any longer term impacts for this. It's like as soon as people leave the door and aren't involved in Football Beyond Borders, they get no benefit from it, which is clearly nonsense, but we've been deliberately cautious with this and we have looked at some scenarios around that. My take at the moment, I'd be interested to hear Nancy's thoughts on this, is we're not quite there yet in terms of being able to put a quantified estimate on like the multiplier effect, if you like, of over the lifetime improving a young person's well-being now and the impact that will have over their lifetime. It's not quite there. I think probably over the next few years we will be getting closer to that and it will become a more established part of the methodology. I just don't think it's quite there yet in terms of the credibility around it. But Nancy, I'd be interested in your take on that.
That's essentially my view as well. So it looks like from the studies that life satisfaction at 14 is predictive up to 8 years, from 14 is predictive up to 8 years later. So you could, and I think at the moment, that evidence from the Treasury side, you could confidently use it in setting your policy objective to think about, actually, it's important to look at the well-being of children and young people because it's important for our future well-being. I think at the moment, the confidence in using that in this type of methodology is not there yet. I think there's quite a risk of double counting, and we need to have greater evidence like how long these effects last. But I think you could be reasonably confident if you improved physical and emotional health over a year, that actually that would have longer term impacts in it. But I think you're right, John, that's where the methodological work needs to go next. And that's not something easy for a charity itself to do. And that's what needs the investment from elsewhere, for research infrastructure, whatever like that.
Yeah, and I would simply add that one of the great advantages of the Be Well stuff is it's tied in with schools and gets schools heavily involved in the data collection, of course. And as soon as you get kids coming out of school, and you're thinking about where do they go after that, then you're into how do we start to measure that? Because they could be going into all sorts of different careers, could be going to further education, university, jobs, so it becomes more complicated and more difficult. I think that's one of the key things. The one final question I'll put to the panel, and then I think we would have to wrap up. About measuring thriving rather than satisfaction. Do you think that's a good way to go forward?
I can come with first thoughts. That's
I mean,
I was going to say, I think, look, there's never going to be a single measure which is a perfect way of capturing this kind of concept of thriving, of quality of life, of everything. My take is that using the life satisfaction measure and some of those other wider well-being measures, such as the short work at Edinburgh or the broader ONS4, does a pretty good job. And it's a step in the right direction, and it definitely captures more of what matters in people's lives. So I think we can always ask questions of whether there could be a better measure. My take is, look, this is a step in the right direction to be capturing this much, and that let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Right. That seems like a good. Well, I remember when we started off measuring well-being with the ONS, doing it back in 2010, 2011. And we were doing it for adults, and because the issues about trying to work out how to do it for children were just too complicated. And you look back and you think, oh, wouldn't it have been great if we had that data from that far back, which helped us a lot with adults to look at the impact of COVID, for example, on well-being, because we had past data. However, there we are. We can't solve everything. Right, it's my job to wrap up now to make sure we finish on time. First of all, a massive thank you to all the panelists and to all of you who've joined us today. I think this is a really fascinating example of a program, and Jack and Nora and Dulcie should be really proud of your parts in all of this. That's really made a difference. And thanks to John and Nancy for actually being able to quantify that difference and show its importance in the broader context. I think this is a template for programs we could use for other programs or for other charities thinking about, well, what's our impact? Rather than measuring, which a lot of them do, lots of the inputs and how many people did our program or whatever, trying to work out what actual difference did it make, I think is just massively important. And this program, I think, highlights for me the importance of data, the importance of getting some comparable data, the importance of being multidisciplinary. It's great that we've got a professor of psychology of education in there. We've got economists, we've got social scientists. We've got people from a wide range of backgrounds, different institutions. We've got schools. We've got the wonderful Football Beyond Borders, got PBE, What Work Centre. This collaboration with all of us thinking about how do we make the world a better place by improving the lives of our children, when we know that one of those big issues is their well-being, and that decline that you showed up front is really scary. I remember having a discussion with Gordon Brown when he was writing a budget once about a line he got in there, which he said was too cheesy to use. It was like, children are only 10% of the population, but they're 100% of our future. And actually, he had a point there that this is really important. So to finish up, thank you very much for all of this. If you're interested in the report, you can download it from the PBE website. If you're interested in future events like this, please sign up to the PBE newsletter. There's a link in the chat. Thank you all for watching, and particularly Jack, Football Beyond Borders. Without you, this would not have been possible. You have done an amazing job, and congratulations. And please, let's everyone be inspired by this and think about how we can do similar things in our community, in our neighborhood, for kids that are really disadvantaged and really need help. So with that, thank you all, and please stay in touch. All the very best.